The world didn't just shift, it cracked open, and what you're watching right now, if you're paying attention, is not a headline. It's a before and after moment in the story of modern geopolitics. Think about what it means when the supreme leader of a nation that has defied the West for nearly 5 decades is gone, killed in a surprise military strike, and his replacement has not been seen or heard from in public for over 6 weeks. Think about what it means when the only country willing to receive messages from that invisible new leader is Russia. Think about what it means when Iran's foreign minister has to fly to St. Petersburg to meet with Vladimir Putin just to find someone who will take their side. This is not normal diplomacy. This is a regime trying to survive. And here's the thing most people are missing. The story is not just about Iran. The story is about what this moment reveals about the entire architecture of global power. Who holds it, who is losing it, and who is quietly positioning to inherit the wreckage. Because make no mistake, there is wreckage. There is wreckage in Tehran, wreckage in the Strait of Hormuz, wreckage in the price of gasoline at your local pump, and wreckage in the assumptions most Americans have held for decades about what stability in the Middle East actually looks like. So let's slow down, take a breath, and actually think this through together. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran, targeting military and government sites and assassinating several senior Iranian officials, including Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. That is a sentence that would have sounded like science fiction 10 years ago. The Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic, the man who for decades was the face and the iron will of an entire theocratic state, was killed at his compound. Iranian state media confirmed that Khamenei was killed while in his office, with IRIB describing the moment as occurring in the early hours of Saturday morning while he was carrying out his assigned duties. And just like that, a 47-year-old system built around one man's authority was suddenly leaderless. Now, before we talk about what comes next, we need to understand what came before, because nothing here happened in a vacuum. This war did not start on February 28th. It started years earlier in a slow, grinding economic war against the Iranian people. Following Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA nuclear deal in 2018, the United States adopted a maximum pressure strategy, and the Biden administration kept most of those sanctions in place, further damaging Iran's economy. In September 2025, the UN reimposed sanctions on Iran using the snapback mechanism, causing the currency to collapse, driving up the price of basic food staples like meat and rice, and freezing Iranian assets abroad. So when people ask why Iranians were protesting in the streets in late 2025 and early 2026, the answer is devastatingly simple. The Iranian rial had dropped to record lows against the US dollar, more than 1.45 million rials to $1 on the free market. While official statistics showed annual inflation running above 40%, with food prices surging far beyond the reach of ordinary families. People were not protesting ideology, they were protesting hunger. And it is worth pausing here for just a moment, because this is the part of the story that the big media networks tend to skip over. They like to frame these events in terms of regime change and democracy, good guys and bad guys, missiles and explosions. But what drives people into the streets in any country, in Iran, in France, in the United States, is when the economic reality of daily life becomes unbearable. In Tehran's bazaars, traders closed their stores to protest the unstable exchange rates and rising costs, and those actions quickly spread into broader anti-government demonstrations. One 70-year-old shopper described how the price of a tray of eggs had jumped dramatically within a single week. That is the real story. That is where revolutions are born. Not in the grand speeches of foreign ministers, but in the moment a grandmother realizes she cannot afford to feed her grandchildren. So by the time January 2026 arrived, Iran was already on fire from the inside. In January 2026, Iranian security forces massacred thousands of civilians in their crackdown on what became the largest protests Iran had seen since 1979. The regime did what authoritarian regimes always do when confronted with the truth of their own failure. They reached for the gun, and that crackdown did what crackdowns always do. It added fuel. Because there is nothing that radicalizes a population faster than watching their neighbors get shot for holding a sign. It was in this context, in the early days of 2026, that intelligence reports began surfacing about something extraordinary. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, had reportedly developed what his inner circle called a Plan B, an escape plan that involved fleeing to Russia if the protests intensified to the point where his security apparatus could no longer contain them. The plan reportedly included Khamenei, his son Mojtaba, and approximately 20 close family members and aides. And here is the detail that tells you everything about the moral economy of authoritarian power. The regime was reportedly busy gathering assets, properties abroad, and cash to facilitate safe passage out of the country. Khamenei controlled a massive financial empire, including the Setad organization, a conglomerate of semi-state foundations known for financial opacity, with holdings that Reuters estimated back in 2013 were worth approximately $95 billion, $95 billion. While Iranians could not afford eggs, the escape blueprint mirrored the actions of Bashar al-Assad, who flew to Moscow to join his family just before opposition forces seized Damascus in December of 2024, and this is where the Russia thread becomes so critical to understanding what is really happening in this part of the world. Russia has become, in effect, the last refuge of the defeated strongman. It is the place you go when you have run out of options, when your own people have turned against you, when the walls are closing in. Assad went to Moscow. The plan for Khamenei was Moscow. And now the new Khamenei, Mojtaba, the son, is communicating with Putin while being invisible to his own people. That tells you something about the nature of this alliance. It is not an alliance of strength. It is an alliance of mutual dependency built on shared vulnerability. Let us talk about Mojtaba Khamenei, because he is now at the center of one of the strangest political situations in the modern world. On March 8, 2026, Khamenei's second son, Mojtaba, was designated as Iran's new supreme leader following the assassination of his father, and then he vanished. Not physically, or at least we have to assume not physically, but publicly, completely, in a way that is almost without precedent for someone holding the highest office in a nation at war. More than 6 weeks after he was announced as the new supreme leader, Iranians have still not seen or heard Mojtaba Khamenei. Statements attributed to him have been read out on national television or posted on social media. The regime has even used AI-generated videos to show him delivering messages, fueling speculation that he is incapacitated or abroad. Let that sit with you for a second. AI-generated videos. The supreme leader of Iran, a country in the middle of a hot war with the United States and Israel, is so absent from public view that the regime is using artificial intelligence to simulate his appearances. A source told CNN that Khamenei had suffered a fractured foot, a bruised left eye, and minor lacerations to his face in the same wave of strikes that killed his father and Iran's top military commanders. So the new supreme leader is injured, invisible, communicating only through written statements and AI-generated appearances, while his country is under naval blockade and his foreign minister is flying to Russia to ask Putin for support. This is what the collapse of a power structure looks like in real time. And what is Putin's response to all of this? During a meeting with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in St. Petersburg, Putin said he had received a message from Iran's new supreme leader and conveyed his gratitude and best wishes for Khamenei's health. Putin described the Iranian people as fighting courageously and heroically for their sovereignty and said Russia would do everything in its power to ensure peace is achieved. Beautiful words, but let's be honest about what those words actually mean in practice. Russia is not sending troops to defend Iran. Russia is not breaking the naval blockade. Russia is offering diplomatic cover and verbal solidarity. And in the meantime, Russia has been providing Iran with intelligence about the locations and movements of American troops, ships, and aircraft, while Iran has been supplying Russia with Shahed drones and short-range ballistic missiles to use against Ukraine. So this is the real nature of the Russia-Iran relationship. It is a transactional arrangement built on mutual need, and it becomes most visible precisely when one side is most desperate. Now let us zoom out, because there is a larger story here about what this conflict is doing to the global economy, and specifically to what it means for Americans. The price of petrol in the US jumped by nearly 30 cents in 1 week amid the Strait of Hormuz blockade and the diplomatic deadlock with Iran. The Strait of Hormuz, for those who need a reminder, is the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes. When Iran closed it, it did not just create a crisis in the Middle East. It created a crisis at every gas station in America. The average price of a gallon of gas in the US reached $4.30. As sources indicated, Trump was laying the groundwork for an extended blockade of Iranian ports. This is the price that ordinary Americans pay for decisions made in Washington and Tel Aviv and Tehran. Decisions that are made without their vote, without their consent, and often without their knowledge until they are standing at the pump watching the numbers spin. And here is something that almost no one in mainstream American media is talking about clearly enough. the ceasefire that was eventually struck on April 8th, a 2-week ceasefire mediated by Pakistan after Iran rejected a 45-day two-phased framework and instead proposed its own 10-point plan, has been violated by both sides almost immediately. By April 9th, there was no sign that the agreement to lift the Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz was being implemented, with ships still being prevented from moving through the waterway, and both Iran and Israel accusing each other of ceasefire violations. So we have a ceasefire that is not really a ceasefire, a supreme leader who is not really visible, a war that is not officially declared in any constitutional sense, and an American public that is paying higher gas prices while being told the mission is essentially complete. Trump scrapped plans to send Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and advisor Jared Kushner to Pakistan's capital for talks with Iran, citing what he described as tremendous infighting and confusion within Tehran's leadership. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian reiterated that Tehran would not enter negotiations while the naval blockade remains in place, so the two sides are in a standoff where Iran will not talk while being blockaded and America will not lift the blockade until Iran talks. This is not diplomacy. This is two parties with their hands around each other's throats, both waiting for the other one to blink first. Trump, for his part, has boasted since the killing of the elder Khamenei that Iran has undergone regime change and described those now negotiating on behalf of Tehran as reasonable, saying, "We're dealing with different people than anybody's dealt with before." And yet a second round of talks broke down after Iranian negotiators failed to appear, leading Trump to extend the ceasefire and describe Iran's government as seriously fractured. So on one hand, regime change has allegedly been accomplished. On the other hand, the regime is still in place, still blockading one of the world's most critical shipping lanes, still launching drones and missiles, still sending written messages from an invisible supreme leader through Russia. This does not look like a victory. It looks like a situation that nobody fully controls. And the human cost? Let's not allow that to disappear into the background noise of geopolitical analysis. Iran's health ministry reported that over a dozen hospitals and clinics across Iran suffered damage in the strikes, including the Gandhi Hospital in Tehran. US and Israeli strikes also damaged centuries-old locations designated by the United Nations as World Heritage Sites, including the Chehel Sotun Palace in Isfahan. These are not military targets. A hospital is not a nuclear facility. A palace that has stood for 400 years is not a missile battery. And yet, when we talk about the cost of this war in American media, we tend to focus on the strategic objectives and the diplomatic chess moves, while the human and historical wreckage gets filed under collateral damage and moved past quickly. The deeper question, and this is the one worth sitting with, is what all of this tells us about where power actually sits in the world right now. For decades, the operating assumption of American foreign policy has been that military superiority translates into strategic outcomes. You bomb the right targets, you remove the right leaders, and the situation resolves in your favor. But what we are watching in real time in Iran is a case study in the limits of that assumption. With the war at roughly 60 days, some lawmakers were arguing about whether the 60-day clock of the war powers resolution had started, while others debated whether ceasefire days count toward the total, and still others argued that the president can unilaterally extend the deadline to 90 days. In other words, even the constitutional framework governing this war is contested. Nobody quite agrees on the rules, and in that uncertainty, the war grinds on. When the ceasefire was announced, oil fell to $94 per barrel. S&P 500 futures jumped more than 2.5% before the opening bell, and markets across Asia and Europe surged, with South Korea's Kospi up nearly 7% and Japan's Nikkei up over 5%. The markets told you in real time what the human cost of this conflict has been. Months of elevated energy prices, disrupted shipping, and geopolitical risk had been baked into every balance sheet in the world. The moment of relief was immediate and massive, but relief is not resolution. The Strait of Hormuz is still contested. The new Iranian supreme leader is still invisible. The ceasefire is still fragile. And Putin is still in St. Petersburg, sending carefully worded messages about peace while supplying intelligence that helps Iran track American warships. This is the world as it actually is, not as the official narratives prefer to present it. It is a world in which a regime can survive the assassination of its leader, a world in which the replacement of that leader communicates through AI videos while reportedly recovering from war wounds in an undisclosed location. A world in which the most powerful military in human history can strike with devastating precision and still not produce a clean political outcome. And it is a world in which Russia, economically sanctioned, militarily bogged down in Ukraine, diplomatically isolated in the West, nevertheless remains the indispensable partner for any state that finds itself in collision with American power. That is the structural reality underneath all the headlines. Russia did not need to fire a single missile in this conflict to maintain relevance. All it needed to do was remain available as the safe harbor, as the intelligence partner, as the diplomatic interlocutor, as the place you send your foreign minister when you need someone to listen. And that availability is itself a form of power, a quiet but durable power that no amount of carrier strike groups can simply bomb out of existence. The world is reorganizing itself. The old certainties are gone. And what replaces them will be shaped not just by who has the most missiles, but by who understands clearly and honestly what is actually happening.